G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to share with you guys a really important perspective that I've come to understand as a physiotherapist about scoliosis and scoliosis pain. And I think it's a perspective that I don't feel is as widely understood, or it's not had by everyone. And I think it really leads us down a path that potentially misses some of the main points about trying to solve your scoliosis pain, or at least help you manage it better and get you to a point where you're very happy with how that's going. So in the video today, I want to share that perspective with you guys, hopefully give you guys some extra hope that you do have more control over what's going on with your body. And then towards the end of the video, I want to show you guys a really simple exercise that we've covered a lot on the channel before. So if you have been following along, you would probably have seen this before. If not, hopefully it's a really helpful exercise to help you manage and conquer your pain, best case scenario. And then we'll touch on a couple of basic concepts towards the end that'll tie it all in together and hopefully give you some perspective about your pain and what's potentially really causing that pain as opposed to just the scoliosis. So that leads me into what we want to talk about in terms of this new perspective, or at least this broader perspective that I think everyone with a scoliosis, or everyone who's treating someone with a scoliosis, needs to have. And that is that just because you have a scoliosis or you have an imperfection in your spine, that doesn't automatically guarantee that that is the source of your pain. It can certainly be a contributing factor, because clearly a scoliosis is a less than perfect functional spine, but that doesn't guarantee that that has to be the cause of your pain. And the reason why I say that is clinically what I find a lot is, and when you're talking with someone, and I'm sure you'll hopefully see yourselves reflected in this example, is when we talk about the cause of your pain, the onset or the history of your back pain based on someone with a scoliosis, what we often find is that there's clearly a period of time before that pain came on where you didn't have pain. You still had the scoliosis, but you didn't have pain 100% of the time. And what we find is that when you cross that threshold to having pain and you go in and see someone, whether that's a doctor or a physiotherapist or a physical therapist, depending on where in the world you are, they will they'll make note of that scoliosis. Maybe you'll mention that to them. They'll look at you and you won't look perfect. Maybe they'll get you to bend forward and they'll see that there'll be a big curvature in your spine. And then you'll tell them where your pain is, and they'll make that really obvious connection that scoliosis and pain are connected. And we as an industry keep reminding you that your pain and your scoliosis are connected. But what's really important to distinguish here is that it's very unlikely that in the period where you didn't have pain to the period where you now have pain, it's very unlikely that your scoliosis has dramatically morphed or progressed to a point where it's now causing that pain in isolation. What's more likely is that your scoliosis would probably be very much the same on a scan, very much the same when you're testing it functionally, the day before you had your pain and then the day after while you have your pain. It's unlikely that anything's changed in that moment. So what that tells me as a therapist, and what we essentially find later down the track when we look back in hindsight, there has to be another set of factors that are in play that are creating that pain. And what's potentially exciting for me as a therapist is that the things that cause someone's scoliosis pain are most likely the exact same things that cause everyone else's pain. It's just that those with the scoliosis have a lower threshold for dysfunction, or a lower threshold for that pain, because they have some already dysfunctional mechanics or dysfunctional loading happening behind the scenes. So what I mean by that is, and I've covered a video on this before in the past about how to figure out the root cause of your neck pain and your back pain and things like that. So I'll link it up here. But an abridged version of that is, when we're talking to people about their day-to-day lives and we're trying to figure out where the cause of that pain is coming from, ultimately, I think the number one cause of most people's neck pain and back pain, irrespective of whether they have a scoliosis or not, are just the basic shapes, postures, and positions that you put your neck and back into day to day. For example, if you're someone who has back pain in this area, or even low back pain that's being transferred from this section of your back, ultimately what we find is when somebody sits and slouches, or you sink into the chair, or you're on the computer doing something, the position that you'll hinge through. So for me, the sharpest point of the hinge is about here. And then when we assess those areas, we tend to find that that is the root cause of where your pain is. which makes sense because there has to be a reason why your back becomes sore. Most people don't have a preceding incident that triggers that pain. Even if you do, it's not often a very traumatic one. It's often a subtle, not very interesting thing like a movement, a movement, or something that you would do every day, but for some reason that's the last straw that causes you pain. So what we often find is that when we look back at the shapes and the positions that you put your spine into, we can see a lot of clues that really help us define where that pain's come from and also why that pain's there in the first place. And that's just with a quote unquote healthy spine, a spine that's relatively normal upon observation. So when we start talking about someone who has a scoliosis that potentially already has a subtle dysfunction there behind the scenes, what we tend to find is that the threshold that you have is a little bit lower to that dysfunction than someone who's relatively normal. And what that means is that if you with a scoliosis and me who thankfully has been lucky enough to not have a scoliosis, if we sat down on the couch and had a slouching contest, we're in the exact same posture, really crappy posture, nothing fancy, we would probably find that my threshold, my tolerance would be greater than someone's who has a scoliosis, where you're potentially starting a little bit behind as opposed to someone who's potentially normal, whatever that means. So what's really important to understand here, and this is the perspective that I want to share with you guys, is that if you can start to pick up on the shapes and the postures that you put your scoliosis into, you'll start to pick up on potentially some of the main hidden, boring, not very sexy causes of why that pain is there in the first place, why that scoliosis is becoming sore. And we can see this, we can prove this in real time. So as we come back to this exercise, so the exercise I want to go through, again, if you've been following the channel, you'll understand this relatively quickly, but we want to take a ball, tennis ball, this is a lacrosse ball, and we can place the ball in your spine, in different sections of your spine, and go looking for things that feel stiff, looking at things that feel tight, looking at things that feel potentially a little bit tender. And then we can start to connect the dots by freeing up those sections, then seeing how you move, seeing how your pain feels, then moving on to the next spot. And what we can do in real time is we can figure out exactly where the cause of your pain is. And then, like I said before, once we find that potentially there's a spot here maybe that's quite tender, there will be a shape, there will most likely be a shape or a posture that you get into that exposes that section over time, irrespective of where your scoliosis is. Now, of course, if you have a section of your spine that maybe curves in a little bit more of a sharper angle or is a bit more of a twist in that area, it is more likely that that area is going to be the area that becomes sore. But if you're not loading it up in a poor position on top of what's already there, then we can start to ask this question as to whether it has to become painful day to day. And as I said, we can use a ball to hopefully answer that question by treating what's there and then seeing what's left over, which for a lot of people doesn't have to be as much as what you expect. So if anything at all. So again, just to quickly show this, we want to find the middle of your back, the spine down the middle. We don't want the ball on the spine in the middle, the bumps down the middle. We want it to just roll off to the side a little bit onto the fleshy bit because that's where the joints of your back are. So we want to place the ball somewhere or anywhere where you feel you might need to. Hopefully you can still see me here. And again, what we're going to do here is the common mistake with this exercise is that people roll around. Because it's a ball, we get seduced into the idea that rolling is better. We promote this as a massage type technique, but the way that I want you to use the ball is very specific. So definitely move the ball around until you feel you hit a spot that feels a little stiff, a little tight, or a little tender. Then I want you to stay there. I just want you to let the ball press in, get it to sink through that muscle tissue to affect the spinal joints or the rib joints underneath, because that's where the party's at a lot of the time in terms of dysfunction. And again, irrespective of your curve, we're looking for the areas that feel stiff. So you might find that if you're on the left-hand side like I am, it feels a little bit stiffer and tighter than I'd like it to be. If I move the ball directly across to the exact same spot on the other side, it feels like it sinks in a lot easier and it's not as tender. So for me, the side that I need to be on is the side that feels the most interesting. So we want to make sure that I'm spending some time here letting the ball press in. Once I've spent enough time here to feel that it maybe relaxes or that I'm sick of it, I'll just move the ball down a little bit and I'll repeat that process. I want to compare the two sides. and have the ball on the side that feels the stiffest and the tightest. And as I said before in previous videos, the really important thing to remember about this exercise is we're not just chasing pain. So if you have a joint on this left-hand side that is painful to push on with the ball, but it doesn't feel stiff and tight, but then when you move it across to the other side and it does feel stiff and tight, but it doesn't hurt, we actually want to push the ball into the stiff side, not the sore side. So don't be seduced by where your pain is, even though clinically it's really important. We want to respect that. When you're using this ball, the idea is we're trying to free up the rusty sections of your spine. So if that doesn't correlate with where the pain is, that's okay, because we want to spend more time on the side and the spots that feel stiffer and tighter, and not just be jamming the ball into an irritated spot. So it's a really important distinction that I think, again, isn't really widely known with that exercise. So please consider that when you're doing it. But as I said, what we want to do here is as we start to take away those layers of stiffness and tightness, we can then retest the movements that you feel are uncomfortable to see what's changed. And what we ultimately find clinically is when we're mobilizing your joints with our hands, which is essentially what you're doing here, we can see a distinct improvement in your pain straight away. And obviously we might need to do some massage over the top of those joints around the back to free up any sort of muscle spasm or muscle tightness if it's there. But ultimately, if we can improve the function of that spine, then we can relegate that scoliosis in a lot of cases to more of a descriptive term as opposed to a definition of how you deserve to feel day to day. So I really wanted to make that clear in the video, and hopefully I have. But just to summarize, just because you have a scoliosis and you have that diagnosis, it doesn't guarantee that that's the cause of your pain. Because when we start to look for the hidden dysfunction around the spine, within that spine, and remove that and improve that, we can start to see a really positive improvement in your pain, hopefully to the point where you don't have that pain for a lot of people. But obviously there are some people that have quite a significant scoliosis where you pass that threshold where your tissues are just really struggling to cope with that position day to day. But I need to share with you that the positions that you put that already dysfunctional spine into matter a lot, because it can really challenge those tissues beyond what they're ready to handle. And that could genuinely be the missing piece to your pain puzzle. So again, please take that perspective with you. Take it to your therapist, take it to your doctor. You've got to explore the peripheral things as well, because you might be missing a whole bunch of simple low-hanging fruit. The ball exercise is obviously a really good one to use. If it's really tender and it's stiff and tight, like I said, if all that's on the same side, then please push in. You can use a tennis ball if it's too hard, but a lacrosse ball is a brilliant one to have the right density and the right pressure to make a change. And then the last concept that I need to sort of really focus on here, we touched on it briefly before, but if you do have a scoliosis and you're working hard to improve the function of your back, you have to put it into better positions. So clearly you're not going to be able to completely flatten out your spine to make it look normal in that regard, but you have the responsibility that you have to put it into the best position possible as often as possible. So as we spoke about before, if you know where the stiff, tight spots in your back are that are potentially coming from a position that you're getting into without realizing things, you have to take it upon yourself to try and get out of those shapes as best as possible. So again, you may not look completely neutral when someone looks at you, but you have to be in the most neutral position possible, where you're up nice and tall, shoulders are back as best as possible. Otherwise, you're just loading up your spine in positions that it's not going to tolerate over time, or it has a potential to not tolerate over time. And those aches and pains may come on faster than someone who doesn't have a scoliosis. So if you're someone who sits at a desk all day, whether you're studying, whether you're working, if you have to drive a lot, if you're in the car, if you love sitting on the couch watching some TV, whatever your sitting position situation looks like, you have to take it upon yourself to try and be in a better position as often as possible. It's boring, it's a pain in the ass to do, it's not fun, but ultimately it can be one of the defining features as to whether you are someone that has a scoliosis and pain, or someone that just has a scoliosis and it's just a visual thing or a diagnosis that you have. And it can be the major difference between having pain or no pain. So it's a really important concept that I hope I got across okay today. I have a couple of videos on how to find your best posture. Again, I'll link them up here so you can just click on them for your convenience. But going forwards, if you found this video useful, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know how you're going and what you need or what you're thinking. If you found this useful, please like the video. And if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Obviously, the more this channel grows, the more these videos can reach a broader audience. And I feel like there's a lot of perspectives that, that I'm finding clinically, that I'm sure other people have come across as well. But to me, I feel like I'm discovering a lot of things that a lot of people aren't talking about. And as I mentioned before, it's just low-hanging fruit, things that you can do that are really simple to help improve your health and function. So if you want to be along for the ride with that, please consider subscribing. But in the meantime, we'll see you next time. Hopefully that helped, and I'll see you soon.